Good evening, community. Tonight, we begin the year with stories that linger in the dark corners of memory, stories of entities and manifestations that for some are impossible to believe and for others are an unfortunate part of life. If you are still a skeptic, congratulations. I truly hope you remain that way, that nothing ever forces you to believe in something you once denied, that you are never the next protagonist of these tales of the night, because someone always is. My name is Gabriella. I am 21 years old and I study general medicine. What I am about to share is not the most violent or grotesque story you will hear here, but for me, having lived it, it remains one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. I live in Monterrey with my parents, but my grandparents live in Mexico City, and some time ago I had to travel there to complete my social service and help take care of them since they are both elderly. Their house is old, built decades ago when they first married, and it has a strange design, with levels split by short staircases, as if the house itself never decided what it wanted to be. One level holds the living areas, another the bedrooms and kitchen, and above that, the rooftop where the laundry area is located, and that detail is important for what happened. One Sunday afternoon, around 5 o'clock, I went up to the rooftop to wash clothes. There was still sunlight, and during that season it did not get dark until well after 7. Not wanting to forget the laundry, I decided to stay upstairs while the washing machine finished its cycle. A while later, my grandparents called me from downstairs to come eat. I went down, ate with them, talked for a bit, and then returned to the rooftop. About 15 minutes passed when I clearly heard someone call my nickname, the one only my grandparents use. "Vela, come down please." The voice was low, almost a whisper, and without thinking much of it, I went back downstairs. When I asked them what they needed, both of them looked confused and told me they had not called me. I insisted, because I was absolutely certain I had heard my name, but my grandmother only looked at me seriously and said something that still echoes in my mind to this day. She told me I had done well by not answering out loud, that I should never respond or say, "I'm coming," when I hear something like that, because responding is said to give permission for spirits to enter your mind or your body. I laughed it off nervously and tried to forget about it, convincing myself it was nothing, and I went back upstairs. This time I put on my headphones so I would not get distracted. The washing machine finished, but since the dryer was broken, I began hanging the clothes on the lines across the rooftop. As I worked, with music playing, I thought I heard my grandparents' voices again, distant this time, calling my name, and the last call sounded almost desperate, like a cry for help. I ripped the headphones off my ears and ran downstairs in panic. When I entered their room, both of them were asleep, breathing peacefully, completely unaware. I turned off the lights and went back up, telling myself I was imagining things, that my grandmother's words had planted the idea in my head. I put my headphones back on and turned the volume up higher than before, determined not to listen to anything else. I kept hanging clothes, and when I was almost done, I heard something different. This time it did not come from outside. It came from inside my head. A clear whisper, calm but wrong, said my nickname again and told me to come down, that it wanted to show me something. The voice repeated itself, growing louder and more insistent, as if scolding me, and at the end of each sentence it let out a soft laugh, playful and mocking, a sound that made my skin crawl in a way no scream ever could. I tried to ignore it. I forced myself to go downstairs, took a shower, and went to bed early, trying to convince myself that sleep would reset everything. I went to sleep that Sunday night, around 8 o'clock. When I woke up, I assumed it was the next morning, but when I stepped out of my room, my grandparents grabbed me and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I asked them what was wrong, and that was when they told me it was Tuesday afternoon, 3:30 to be exact. For them, I had been missing for a day and a half. They could not find me anywhere. I was not in my room, not in the house, and I had not gone out. My parents, my uncles, my cousins, everyone had been looking for me, asking neighbors, terrified that something had happened. But for me, no time had passed. I believed I had only slept through the night. To this day, I do not know what really happened. I do not know if it was a break in reality that only I experienced, or something else entirely. All I know is that voice, that presence, filled me with a kind of fear unlike anything I have felt before or since, a cold, invasive fear that did not feel external, but intimate, as if it knew me. Who was it? Or rather, what was it? Good evening, that called community. My name and took something from me that night. The next story I want to share happened many years ago, yet it remains as vivid and terrifying as if it occurred yesterday. My name is Kelly. I am a nurse, and this experience took place in 1991 in a hospital located in western El Salvador. I prefer not to mention the exact department out of respect and caution. It was around 8 o'clock at night when I finished one of my rounds and headed down to the emergency area. On one of the stretchers sat an elderly woman waiting to be admitted. She was extremely thin, with long white hair that reached past her shoulders, and her face was deeply marked by age. Something about her immediately caught my attention, though, something that felt wrong even before everything else happened. She was wearing very high platform sandals, the kind with thick heels, a type of footwear completely inappropriate for someone her age, especially someone waiting for medical attention. Beside her stood a younger woman, whom I assumed was a relative. I asked if they needed anything, and she told me they were waiting for an X-ray before the older woman could be assigned a bed. There was nothing I could do at that moment, so I apologized and continued with my duties. Hours passed, and near midnight during the shift change, I received a call requesting my help to insert and foreline for a patient in the surgical area. That area was directly across from the women's internal medicine ward, separated only by a narrow corridor. The rooms had glass walls and doors, making it easy to see inside. At that time, there were 3 nurses, a cleaning staff member, and myself in that section. While I was finishing the procedure, we heard a sound. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was deep, guttural, heavy, almost like a growl, but far more intense and unnatural. It was so clear and so loud that all of us froze, instinctively trying to identify where it was coming from. One of the nurses stepped into the hallway and returned, pale, saying the sound was coming from the women's medicine ward. She walked toward one of the cubicles while we stayed behind, still processing what we had heard. Seconds later, she ran back screaming, completely hysterical. Another nurse followed her to see what had happened, and moments later she returned the same way, screaming and crying. Only the cleaning woman and I remained. We looked at each other, confused and terrified. She tried to go investigate on her own, driven by curiosity, but I told her to wait and go together. She moved a few steps ahead anyway, entered the cubicle, and almost immediately ran out screaming just like the others. That left only me. As terrified as I was, I felt I had to see it for myself. I walked slowly toward the cubicle. The door was open. I stopped just before crossing the threshold, and that was when I saw her. The elderly woman was sitting on the bed, bent forward in a way that no human body should be able to bend. Her torso was folded completely over her legs, her chest nearly touching her feet. She was gripping the metal rail of the bed with impossible strength. Her arms were twisted unnaturally, and her eyes were completely white, staring straight ahead without blinking. But the worst part, the part that still haunts me, was her mouth. It did not look like a human mouth anymore. It was a large, black, round hole that took up most of the lower half of her face, and from that hole came the horrible sound we had heard, a deep, inhuman noise that vibrated through the air. I could not move. I could not step inside. Tears started streaming down my face without me even realizing I had begun to cry. I tried to pray, to ask God for help, but my mind went completely blank. I could not remember a single prayer, not even the ones I had known since childhood. I stood there, frozen, staring at that thing, until something my grandmother used to tell me suddenly came back to me. She always said that when you face evil things, spirits, witches, or apparitions, you must never turn your back on them, because they will attach themselves to you. I do not know why I remembered that instead of a prayer, but it was enough. I began walking backwards slowly, never taking my eyes off that twisted figure, never turning my back. The sound continued, filling the corridor, until I was far enough away that the cubicle was no longer in my sight. Only then did I turn around and run to the nurse's station. I was shaking uncontrollably, crying, barely able to stand. The other 2 nurses were there, on their knees, praying and crying just like me. One of them had managed to call the doctor on duty. When he arrived, he was annoyed, asking why we were making such a scene. I could barely explain, only telling him to go check the elderly woman in the women's medicine ward and pointing out the bed. He went, and a few minutes later he returned calm, even irritated. He said he saw nothing out of the ordinary. The woman was lying normally on the bed. He asked us what time it was, and when we told him it was exactly midnight, between Thursday and Friday, he laughed softly and said that in those towns people always talked about witches and shapeshifters, about strange things they believed in, clearly dismissing our fear. The woman turned out to be the same elderly patient I had seen earlier in the emergency room, the one with the platform sandals. Days later, I learned she had been transferred to another hospital, and some time after that, I was told she had died. We never spoke about that night again during our shifts. It was something we buried in silence. I spent weeks unable to sleep and needed medication just to close my eyes. Years later, I asked 2 of the nurses separately if they remembered that night, and both refused to talk about it. Only recently did I manage to speak to the 3rd one, the last person I had not asked. She looked at me and simply said yes, that it was real, that what we saw that night truly happened. Even now, after all these years, what I remember most vividly is not the image, but the sound, because it did not resemble anything human, anything natural, and it is a sound I hope I never hear again.